afternoon. My name is Jess Ross, and I am the School Community Garden Project Lead at Nourish Nova Scotia. And on behalf of Nourish Nova Scotia, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on youth food forests. Nourish Nova Scotia is a registered charitable organization, and we are focused on the nourishment of children and youth within our province. We carry out our mission through programs, advocacy, and partnerships. And one of our goals is to showcase successful programs that are doing great work across the province. So we're excited to be doing that with the next hour with a few awesome food forest founders working here in Nova Scotia to create youth-centered growing spaces. So thanks for joining. I would like to start just by acknowledging I'm hailing in from Chibuktuk, from Sabaganagadi First Nation territory in Halifax, and I would encourage you to all actually put where you're coming from today. It would be great to know just the land that you're on. If you know the Indigenous name, the Mi'kmaq name, put it in. It'd be great just to see where folks are joining from. So we do a lot of work around plants, pollinator gardens, climate change, and so Indigenous sovereignty and supporting Indigenous sovereignty is a really important part of the work that we do, or it's something that we keep in mind and are working towards figuring out how to integrate into our programming. So I would invite you to also consider how you might integrate reconciliation into your gardening program. For some schools, that looks like planting a medicine garden. For other schools, there's examples of growing plants and offering them to Mi'kmaq Namatnaway schools to form a relationship through plants. So there are some really interesting openings to access and talk about even Indigenous plants to this land and what that means and their native and Mi'kmaq significance. So thank you for joining. I wanted to just say briefly, so if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the chat. You won't be featured in the recording unless you're speaking. And so just as a heads up, so Nourish Nova Scotia is an organization that's 13 years old, and we are in a pretty serious period of expansion. We have core program and focus areas that you'll see here. So some of our really tangible on-the-ground programs are Farm to School Snack, which is a school snack program that pairs schools with accessible and available monthly local snacks and resources and info sheets on how to engage youth in getting interested in those snacks, including things like cabbage and radish. It's a great way to expose youth to things they might not eat just on their own, or things they might not eat at all. So Youth Food Leaders is another emerging program that is focused on skill development and leadership through food work. So there's a lot of like food safety and food skill building, while also designing a community-focused food project that carries through the whole program. We also do a lot of advocacy work around school food and are the anchor partner for the National Coalition for Healthy School Food. And Nourish Nova Scotia has been very important in lobbying and advocating for the school food program, which we now have, and we will continue to work with the government to make sure that as the school food program it evolves in a way that aligns with awesome values like local food, healthy food, and youth involvement and youth engagement in certain ways in the food and the school food community. And of course, the Grow, Eat, Learn program is what I work on, and we've got a bunch of staff now, which is incredibly awesome. So we've got 3 regional garden mentors who are in this call. Maybe you can just raise your hand. We've got Ruth, who's going to speak, Raina and Bria, who's doing some graphic note-taking for us today that they'll share at the end. So we are a new team working on supporting schools and gardens in our local areas, while also creating resources and facilitation guides and workshop structures and plans to support and engage youth in gardening activities around the province. Another area of our work is network building and knowledge sharing, which you are participating in today by attending this webinar, and ideally joining the GEL network and maybe attending future events as they unfold over the coming growing seasons. Our other main focus is capacity building across Nova Scotia. So we do things like distribute grants on behalf of the education department and work towards just adding successful gardening program at schools and youth-centered spaces across the province. I'm going to drop a link in the chat after that has a new funding opportunity we have, which is a garden grant program available to schools in Nova Scotia to implement over the coming growing season until late fall. Before we dig in to the content around youth food forests, which I'm very excited about, I'll just share briefly that we are working through our resource creation and through events like this and knowledge sharing opportunities like this to promote food forests. We're working on making clear and tangible the connections between gardening and climate action. A lot of our funding comes from provincial funding that is earmarked for climate change adaptation work, and the government recognizes that youth awareness and youth education is incredibly important to building citizenry and communities across the province that can deal with climate adaptation and also feel empowered and hopeful in doing things like habitat creation. So we're going to talk today about pollinators and the relationship between plants with each other and plants with the environment. So there are a lot of ways we can actually teach and do around things like habitat creation to allow students and youth to think about the land and their relationship to it a little bit differently. So these 5 areas here are climate actions that we try and build into our resources and we try to make clear. We hope to foster a generation of land stewards who know about water, the importance of water and the importance of soil, not just in growing food, but also to the environment and how those things can help build a climate resilient future for Nova Scotia. Very quickly, we have an awesome learning hub. I'm going to put this link in the chat once I'm not talking to you. You can see the tools that we have developed that are available. They're not all just for teachers. In fact, we try to create things that do work for educators, but also work for community group leaders who work with youth. So take a look around what's available. We have garden lessons. We have some interactive things like coloring activities and pollinator bingo, as well as really practical things like a guide to greenhouses designed for schools. So giving advice about placement, about maintenance, etc. So I will put a link, and here's an example of a recent resource that we just released called Guide to Starting a School Garden Club. And this is a really detailed document that goes through necessary stages, important tips and strategies for sustainability and student engagement. And so if you have a garden club, or even if you're engaged in gardening at your school and you want to find some ways to increase youth engagement, you can consider starting a school garden club, or you can also use this resource to look at just the student-led approaches. And it's just a deep dive into youth engagement in school spaces, written by a Schools Plus worker in HRCE named Eric Garth. Yeah, so that is all I will say about that. We are now going to dive into what you are all here to learn about. And that is food forests. And so first up, we have Raina McDonald, who is the founder of Scotsburn Community Food Forest in Pictou County. And Raina is a current Grow, Eat, Learn mentor for the Northern Mainland. And a fun plant fact about Raina is she's currently in awe of what it takes to grow trees from seeds, especially black walnuts. So I will leave it to you now, Raina, to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here because food forests really light me up. So the chance to talk about them is an exciting one. So I'm just going to share a little bit, like broad sweep, what is a food forest, some of the nuts and bolts, and some considerations when you go to start a food forest. And then we'll get into more of the details and case studies after that. So what is a food forest? There are a few terms that are sometimes used interchangeably, like food forestry, agroforestry, edible forest gardening. Essentially, we're talking about a land use system in which trees, shrubs, and other food crops are planted all together, so interplanting, as opposed to maybe a traditional annual garden where you have very tidy rows of one thing. You've got your long row of carrots next to your long row of peas. So we're creating a lot of diversity interplanted in a food forest. They are often multi-storied. So as you can see in the picture on the left, we've got a taller tree, some shrubs around it, and then some other plants keeping the trees company. Food forests are modeled after the way nature does things, especially like when you step into a wild forest, you see the layers of a canopy, an understory, shrubs, ground cover. So when we're designing food forests, we look to the way nature does things, and we kind of try to mimic that in our designed systems. Another key point is that food forests are about creating regenerative gardening. So we're not just sustaining a space, but we're actually building an abundance, and we're building soil. We're regenerating this little strip of land as we go. And often food forests are a fair bit of work to start, but over time, there's less and less human input required. I think we can go to the next slide, please, Jess. So, food forests are designed with the ethics of permaculture in mind. Permaculture is an approach to land management that can also span into community design. So not just the way we grow food, but the way we interact and create relationship in community. Permaculture is guided by these three principles, or sorry, the three ethics here: the earth care, people care, and fair share. And there's also a connected list of principles. So Jess is going to drop the permaculture principles in the chat at some point, just for you to be able to refer to. So these are guiding principles when we're coming up with a design for a food forest that can help us always be circling back to how are we tending to the earth, how are we tending to the people in our community, and how do we create an abundance that can be shared around. Next slide, please. All right. So I mentioned the layers. So when you step out into the woods here, you will often see the tallest layer being, say, a hemlock tree or a large spruce or birch. And then when you start looking under that, you'll see smaller trees that are reaching up to meet the overstory or the canopy. And you'll see shrubs all the way down to the ground cover, and elements that you might not necessarily know to look for, like a fungal layer or mycelial networks that are in the soil. So we look to weave all of this into the design of our food forests. So this is just an example of 9 of the layers. Sometimes when we're starting food forests, if we can aim for maybe 4 layers to start, and then as we build, we can add more layers, like a vining layer, for example, might not be added until you have an established canopy layer. And a big part of creating food forests is taking care of our soil and building fertility into the soil. So ground covers are really important. We don't want to have any exposed soil that can be eroded with weather. And next slide, please. So guilds are a term that are often used in the context of food forests and permaculture. And what a guild is a collection of plants that keep each other company and grow well together. And on the left, you can see an example of an apple tree guild. And on the right is an image from Scotsburn Community Food Forest. That's actually a pear tree guild. So you can see plants working together, sort of like, if you're familiar with annual gardening, the notion of companion planting. So it's very similar to that, companion planting, finding plants that work well together and creating those layers. And essentially, when you link several guilds together, you are creating a food forest. Jess is going to share in the chat a link to a new resource that we've just created at Nourish Nova Scotia on how to create an apple tree guild. So that can be found in our Learning Hub, and that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch on some tips on beginning a food forest, and I thought I'd share some examples of images from Scotsburn Community Food Forest. The top left photo you can see in May 2020, we broke ground on our project. And essentially, we converted a monocrop of lawn into a thriving ecosystem that you see on the bottom right. This photo was taken in September of last year. So after 5 growing seasons, we're starting to really see the canopy layer, the shrubs are filling in. The herbaceous layer refers to a lot of the diversity that happens in plants like rhubarb, hostas, swamp milkweed, various pollinator plants. And these are plants that they show up in the spring, like the rhubarb is just pushing up now. It's one of our first edibles in the food forest. And then they die back completely in the fall, winter. So you don't see them in the winter, but then they come back year after year. So food forests are often focused on perennials, but you can still interplant annuals. When we were beginning this project, we knew we were going to do this in a phased approach. And we had a big plan, and then COVID hit, and we weren't gathering in community. But we decided to proceed regardless by building awareness with these beautiful sunflowers the first year. We also planted a lot of soil building bush beans, and you can see a little harvest of bush beans in the bottom middle photo that is on top of our planning diagram there. So we mapped out on the bottom left photo, you can see like spray paint drawing right on the ground. And this is how we took our map that we'd drawn out of the design for the guilds onto the ground. And at the end of that sunflower year in the fall, we planted all of our trees and our shrubs. So that first breaking ground was the beginning stage where we brought in a tiller, a walk-behind tractor, with the intention of never bringing a tiller back into that space, because often food forests are about a no-till regenerative approach where we're creating permanent agriculture. It will change and evolve over time, but the permanent of permaculture is more about a perennial system. Okay, next slide. And so these are just some images of our first big work party when we could gather outside again in 2020. This is the fall after we planted a whole bunch of sunflowers and brought in compost and planted beans as a nitrogen fixer for the soil. So this is the fall. We've just planted a whole bunch of perennials and trees. Next slide, please. It's a big project to take on if we don't do a phased approach. So we really went with the seasons, did a little bit at a time. And these are more images from the first fall. Okay, next slide. So this project in particular is situated right next to Scotsburn Elementary School. So one of the most meaningful and important parts of the project is weaving the youth into the food forest space and knowing that it's become an outdoor classroom, both for teachers to bring their students out and bring their own curriculum content out into an outside space, but also for the children to be learning about what's going on in this biodiverse ecosystem. How is this food forest feeding people and pollinators and birds, and really having them involved from the beginning. So you can see a photo there of students helping plant swamp milkweed that first year, and they've really been involved in creating monarch habitat. They are involved in planting direct seeding plants in between the perennials in the spring. And then they've been involved in dreaming up this harvest share stand that you can see in the picture on the left. So we talked about sharing food in community, and this garden group at Scotsburn Elementary decided that it was a great idea to create a harvest share stand. So they helped with the design, they created the murals, and this has become a real hub of life for sharing food that we grow in the food forest, as well as gardeners in the community who have a surplus, they know to bring their extra here. And so it's a happening space, and it's a great platform to talk about food security and food literacy and food systems literacy. Okay, next slide, please.
And you've got about 1 to 2 minutes left, Rena.
Awesome. Okay. This is my final slide here. So food forests can be an amazing space for intergenerational knowledge sharing. So coming together, you can see there's a class from Scotsburn Elementary on the bottom, or on the right photo. But we do a lot of workshops in this space in the community as well. And so having the different generations teach each other and share knowledge, it's really quite endless. The opportunities for learning in the space. We do workshops like wattling, so weaving with natural materials, how to create trellises out of that material, and fencing. The picture on the bottom left is the youth are helping us save seeds from the perennial plants that then get shared around in community. And then we're learning about permaculture in the top left image. So really rich, fertile spaces, both for growing food and connecting in community and learning. So that's my quick overview. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it over to Ruth, or maybe Jess is going to first. And I'm so glad that Ruth will touch on pollinators, because that's such a rich, important part of food forests as well.
Yeah, we're going to have, I guess, a little science moment, a little science and plant knowledge, animal knowledge breakout moment. So as I mentioned, I gave an example of habitat creation. So even a food forest is an example of habitat creation. But one of the reasons why we would plant a regenerative perennial garden with pollinators, or a specific butterfly garden, or a pollinator tea garden, which is something that we have grants available for, is to support special animals that rely on special plants. So Ruth is going to take it away. And Ruth is our Grow, Eat, Learn mentor from Cape Breton, or coming in from Cape Breton, and has been gardening for many decades, and is homesteading near Mabu, and is a big advocate and supporter of the ruby throat hummingbird, which we're going to learn a little bit about right now. Sorry, you have to unmute.
There. Thanks. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about the ruby-throated hummingbird. I have not seen any in Cape Breton, or at least this part of Cape Breton yet, but apparently somebody has seen them over in Sydney Mines, so I don't know how that works. But anyway, they're over there. But I'm also going to be talking about one of the reasons why ruby-throated hummingbirds are so important, and just a little background about the ruby-throated hummingbird. It is our only nesting native species east of the Mississippi River, and it goes as far north, I believe, as Newfoundland. And they are a migratory bird. Their migration is exceptional. How these little birds go back and forth every year, and they apparently can remember. They have memories of where feeders are, where certain plants are. And they are considered by many Indigenous people throughout the Americas, because they are only in the Americas, not just the ruby-throated, but the 300 other species. They are considered sacred messenger creatures. And so seeing one is always lifts my spirits. But one of their roles that has been identified by science is their importance in pollination. And so I just want to mention a little bit about what pollination is. Probably most people know, but just a little reminder, a little refresher. So pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther, which is the male part of the flower, to the female part, the stigma. And 90% of all flowering plants, angiosperms, are pollinated by one or more pollinators. So in most instances, that's insects, but it can also be birds, like the hummingbird, and in more southern climates, bats also. And if they're not pollinated, if plants aren't pollinated by insects, birds, or bats, they would be wind pollinated. So that's 90% of all flowering plants require some form of pollinator, pollinators. Another way to think about this is that 1 in 3 bites of food are dependent on pollination services. So in other words, no pollination, no food. And that's become a critical issue in the minds of a lot of politicians. So, policy, science, farmers. There's been a real scare about the loss of the honeybee, but even perhaps more importantly, the wild bees. So, one way of talking about this or giving a scientific or ecological concept or name to this is pollinators ensure ecological goods and services are intact. And ecological goods and services are the economic benefits to human of healthy functioning ecosystems. And there are other categories of ecological goods and services too that are provided by forest cover or salt marshes or other intact ecosystems. And so pollinators are a part of what keeps the system going. If we're not thinking of ecological goods and services, though, we might think of pollinators in a less human-centric terms, and I just find them amazing, beautiful, and clearly reflective of cosmic creativity. Because they're sort of wild looking and beautiful, and sometimes it's even hard to understand why they look the way that they do. Um, Another concept I wanted to talk about is pollination partnerships. So some flowering plants and pollinators have co-evolved together, and that makes those creatures pollen specialists. And in fact, the ruby-throated hummingbird is a pollen specialist with a couple of flowers. Uh, One of the most important ones in Nova Scotia is the Canada lily, and most people have never seen a Canada lily because they are at risk now. And one of the reasons that they're at risk is that their habitat has been destroyed, oftentimes through farming, oftentimes through development. They tend to like living on the rich intervale soil, which is also highly coveted by highly coveted farmland. But the ruby-throated hummingbird is one of the only creatures, one of the only birds that will, in fact, they are the only bird that actually pollinates the Canada lily. So in that way, the the hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird, is also considered a keystone species. And if you think about a keystone in building, what a keystone is, it's basically the stone that keeps an arch intact. It keeps the building together. And it's just one stone, but it plays a really disproportionately large role in maintaining a structure. And when we talk about keystone species in ecosystems, they play a disproportionately large role in maintaining ecosystem functions. So even though the hummingbird is just a small bird, and it doesn't just pollinate Canada lilies. It is in some ways non-discriminatory. It will pollinate other plants as well, but it does prefer certain kinds of structures of plants. And those structures make it that many other pollinating insects are not successful in pollinating them because they usually are tubular and deep and require the long beak of the hummingbird. Um, but I also,
Sorry.
am I running out of time?
Yeah, 1 minute.
Oh, okay. But not all pollinators are cute or even likable, but they are essential. And I wanted to bring this point up because one pollinator that we usually don't really like to think about are mosquitoes. And mosquitoes actually do have a really important, and they are also considered a keystone species too. They are responsible for pollinating certain orchids and grasses. Um, Pollinators are at risk right now. Most pollinators are at risk because of loss of habitat. Those that migrate usually face lots of obstacles, pesticides, night light oftentimes confuses, especially in migration, climate change, and invasive species. So anything that we can do to mitigate those, such as planting food forests, our pollinator gardens, to help out is a really important gesture in maintaining for the next generation these incredible creatures. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing your passion and your wisdom. And just to mention that we have a suggested grouping of plants of 10 plants that are a mix of native pollinators, other pollinators, and tea plants. And we have the cardinal flower, which you can see in one image with the ruby-throated hummingbird, and then the swamp milkweed is the plant that pairs with the monarch butterfly. So without further ado, although I am going to have to do a little screen share swap here, we have our next and final presenter on food forests. And we have with us today Teresa Quilty, who I've had the pleasure of working with now since last year. And Teresa is the project co-founder and coordinator of the Nayatic Food Forest, which is a part of the Blue Nose Academy and Elementary School in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. Teresa currently has a plant crush on sweet fern, which is something I can really relate to. So let me see here. Take it away.
Great. Thanks very much. You can hear me okay? Yes, great. Thanks very much. It's great to be here and talk to you about our project. I think that, the last year or so being involved with Grow, Eat, Learn program with Jess and also getting to know Raina and her project, I feel like I could sort of jump off Raina's presentation. When I discovered that Raina's project existed, it was really great. Wish I had known a lot of these things when we first started, but I'm hoping that what I can share are some of the practical aspects of our project. I came into this more as a community organizer, less as somebody who knew anything about food forests. So my presentation will be more as how did we make our project happen and some of the considerations, and definitely really wonderful to sort of build off also and know that we managed to do some things right and also learn some things along the way. So hopefully that's helpful to you. So our project is called Nayadak, the Food Forest at Blue Nose Academy. And Nayadak is a word in the Mi'kmaq language, or an expression in the Mi'kmaq language. It means the sun is coming out. And the name was given to us by one of our guides, Sean Feener, who is the Mi'kmaq education coordinator for the South Shore Center for Education, and also really helped guide our project from the beginning too. So yeah, next slide, please. We started also during the pandemic a group of friends, community members who were looking for some way to be able to connect with the community and do something to alleviate some of our environmental anxiety that we were having, climate anxiety and so on, something practical. We envisioned a place to creating a place locally where we could learn, play, eat, and connect together with people and nature. And so this was an idea that was spawned in 2021. And we approached the school, the local school in our small town of about 2,500 people. It's a P to 9 public school with about 600 students at the time. It's really swelled and it's crowded 700 students now. So pretty busy place. Small town, but it's actually a very, it's not a large school ground, and it's a very artificial kind of school ground, something that you might see in an urban setting. So yeah, so next slide, please. We approached the school after several meetings. They said, yes, we'd love for you to do that. And so it really was a community-driven project in partnership with the school. So we definitely wanted to design for the community and for the school. So we had to think about a lot of things, and we spent time doing that through 2022. It was a very difficult time to work because of the pandemic, lots of stress with the school and the community. But so these are sort of 3 buckets of some of the things that we thought about. We had lots of considerations in terms of the site. And if you're getting started, you're going to want to think about a lot of these different things. There are constraints to the site. In our case, we had to go to the town and find out that there were all sorts of infrastructure under the ground and decide that there were places that weren't going to be very good to dig. We have we have very heavy deer pressure in our area. And so that was a constraint. We had to think about wind and light and where we would have water, adjacent buildings, and also where the students play, because as I said, it's a pretty crowded playground. So those were some of our considerations. And we wanted to get really clear on our shared goals. And so we really sort of had 2 pockets of goals around values for people and also for the natural world. And I think, a lot of what we came up with really aligns with what Ruth and Raina were talking about too, a lot of the values there in stewarding habitat and so on. And then we thought about the constraints we have in terms of our resources, and just being some volunteers, we sometimes thought, how on earth are we going to make this happen? And it became clear to us, sort of about a year into this, that we were really going to have to drive it from the community, that the school didn't have extra bandwidth or resources to even, to really even be on a committee or contribute to this. So it was really going to be up to us to make it happen and sort of consult with the school and make sure that we're hopefully building something that will work for them. Next slide, please. So as we went through that design process, then we really thought about some of the things that we wanted to include. We talked to teachers and principal, community members and students and so on. And we came up with some of the different components listed here that we thought would be great to have in our food forest. So we identified an area that is high visibility. It's called the bus loop. So it really is artificial. It's about an 11,000 square foot oval, and it's surrounded by pavement. The buses loop around it when they're picking up and dropping off the kids. And but it's a low traffic. Otherwise, it's a low traffic area, and actually the kids from grade 3 up play in that area during recess. They have lunch there outside and so on. And it's also visible so that people can walk by and do walk their dogs or things like that. So we wanted to start out there. The school also wanted us to go into the sort of the back playground where the younger students play, but we found there were so many constraints there. We thought we'll start out in the front. So it's a large oval area. It's quite artificial. It was really engineered as a lawn that's capped with clay, and the grass could barely grow there, and 2 linden trees, 2 lonely linden trees in the middle of a lawn. So that's the space that we began to work in to try to create some of these things. So next slide, please. And so we sort of put this design out there, put the plans out there. We did, lots of presentations to community groups and so on. And so we really did have to sort of come up with a design, a plan, a budget, and ask for money and in-kind support. And so we did get lots of help, local donations the first year, which we were very grateful for. The community was very generous, and also some in-kind support. And then in our second year, we connected with Nourish Nova Scotia, the Grow Eat Learn program, and some grants like the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, and so on. So and the also provincial fund as well. So so those let us work. Some of you may wonder, how much money did you need? Our project, we've spent in the area of 20,000 per year for this is our third year. And we would consider that this is we're sort of winding up our development phase and sort of moving into, sort of sustainability, just continuing the project. So we'll probably spend less money in future years, although as Raina said, the programming is just endless possibilities. And so, there's sort of no limit to what you could do or how much you could spend. But at least in terms of development, the physical development, this is our third and probably final year for the most part. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're really community powered, and this is a snapshot of at the end of a work party. We're happy, muddy, all ages. We had great turnouts. Our first year, we would have what we called work and learn parties or community workshops in the spring and in the fall, starting in 2023. And we sort of mapped out what we wanted to do operationally to get some work done, and such as build some guilds and put up a fence to keep the deer out, whatever our goals were in terms of operations for that time. We would try to build some learning into it, and then get some snacks and have people come out so that people felt happy, and we really did have a lot of fun and built relationships and connection through that process. So we had a pretty high-powered, I would say pretty intense first, well, even this year is still intense, of development, trying to get all of this done. And so our first year, we fenced a large area of fruit and nut tree guilds, and we have 16 guilds in there. I was surprised to actually count them the other day. I realized there's 16 in there. And although they're young, they're not as mature as what the pictures that Raina showed you yet of hers. And then in sort of into late 2023, we started to also build a larger area, which we're calling a tiny Wabanaki forest. The Wabanaki is the name of the native forest to this region, and it's an endangered ecosystem. And so that's a goal that we had. We didn't fence it at first, and it got decimated by the deer, and so we did fence it finally last year, and now we're replanting a lot of things. So and next slide, please. So I think I've touched on several of these things. It's worth saying that we are mainly volunteers and some contracted coordination. And we also got a lot of in-kind guidance and support. Next slide. And you can see class here installing some perennial mushroom beds and some others of students planting seeds. And so we've really worked, because we're community driven, we've really had to work to engage the teachers by sort of orienting the teachers to what's available and encouraging them to make a connection with their curriculum. And next slide, please. And so we've really found that's something that worked well last year in September with a new batch of teachers. We took all of them out to the forest and found that actually there were some teachers that, even though we're 100 steps away from the door, or less than 100 steps, 100 feet from the door, some teachers actually said, I've never been in the forest yet. So it is new, but it's very close by. And so we found we had to orient them and let them know about everything that's available, and really do some work to help them bridge the gap, to become comfortable and try to equip the teachers so that they could bring the kids out. What we find though at recess, is that the kids just run out and it's very lively. So there's a lot of organic activity happening with the students. And as we are able to engage the younger students, we find that they have a really great relationship going forward. And my next and final slide. If there are some lessons that we learned, I would say to pick three sort of categories of challenges. Open access is something that we've wanted to achieve. This is something, the food forest is always open to students during school hours and to the public outside of school hours. And so we've really tried to hold people capable of respecting the forest and equipping them to take care of it. So with the school, though, there's lots of little feet running around and lots of things getting compacted, and it's been challenging to build it while it's in an active school setting. So we have been co-creating with the students and teachers behavioral guidelines. We've put up signage around that, and we're trying to really make the paths very clear so that they know where to step and where not to step. Capacity is a challenge, of course, when you're doing a project like this. It's really probably more than I imagined we would have gotten into. If I'd known how big it was when I started, I might not have done it. So in a way, that's good. But I really love Raina's approach of doing a guild at a time and phasing it. Our project, we probably took on a larger area, and now it's been a lot of work to fill it in. So I like her modular approach to the guilds, but we didn't do it that way. We took on a large area, and we're filling it in as we go, and it's really starting to look beautiful. It's the third year, and it's starting to fill in, and so it really is. It can feel discouraging in the beginning when the plants are small and not looking like much, and you see more dirt than plant, but it does fill in, and that's great. So our model has been that learning is the same as doing, is the same as volunteering, and that's how we get things done. And it's a model that works well. And then the third challenge has been engaging teachers and community. And I talked about some of the things that we've done. So we really find that, that for the teachers, they can sometimes struggle to find a way to get themselves out there because they're accustomed to being in the classroom. And so I think the more the curriculum becomes explicitly aligned with nature-based learning, and hopefully that will happen in future, then that makes it probably easier for the teachers to get out there. In the meantime, we're doing our best to orient and equip them. So yeah, so those are some of the challenges and lessons that we've learned. It's a super rewarding project, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Teresa, and for sharing. I would love to hear any questions that you might have. Feel free to put them in the chat if you don't want to come on and speak. I'm not sure if there are people in the crowd who are thinking about a food forest. I would encourage, I wondered, a question that I had was around, like, can you have a food forest that just has one guild? Or like thinking about people who might want to get their feet wet, but probably won't ever design something quite like the Blue Nose food forest. Just wondering about, like one guild possibility. Is that a thing?
Absolutely. I feel like you could call a guild a food forest. I think Annie Ferguson is somebody that's on the call right now, and she just shared with me that they've created many food forests along a trail system here. And I think those are likely a guild, maybe 2 guilds each. So yes, all the same components. It's just a smaller 1 guild food forest. And so if you think about the size of a apple tree with plantings around it, that would be your mini food forest.
Sorry, how do you entice educators is a question from the chat. You touched on this a little bit, but yeah, I noticed on the slide it says programming is optional.
Yeah. Yeah, we try to remind ourselves that, we because we're a community group doing this, it really, you know, we see that we're building an asset in our community. And just like there's it used to be a lawn, and we've transformed it into a very biodiverse area, and we have seen hummingbirds in it. So like it's, you know, it's really doing its job in a lot of ways. And the kids are out there eating chives at recess and things like that. So so yeah, how do you entice educators? I think we our approach. I mean, I don't know about other schools. We do find that there's a lot of pressure in our school. There seems to be a really high stress level. It's oversubscribed in terms of students. So um, so we're finding that we work with the teachers where we can, when we can. And we're trying to not, I stressed about it a lot at the beginning. I was like, why are they not coming out? Why are they not more involved? Why are they not helping? And I mean, you know, that was during the pandemic. It was extremely stressful. So I think that was just not very sensitive of me. So we recognize that we're building this and making an asset, and then we work with the teachers where we can, when we can. There are a few more teachers who are diving deep this year, you know, doing the perennial mushroom beds. There's some teachers that want to do some labeling, and you know, I've put together this huge database of the plants that we have. There's hundreds now, and so they can do plant identification and labeling and translating that into scientific names. We've got, you know, French immersion classes that will do that, where they're native plants. They can find the Mi'kmaq name. So we have some of that information in our database, and the students and teachers can work on that in a hands-on way. So we're trying to find just practical things, and hopefully when those teachers do some really awesome stuff, they'll talk about it, and then the other teachers will feel jealous or or excited, or go, oh, I want to do that too. We've got an art teacher who's going to put an art installation in. She also happens to be a lavender farmer, and so she's going to donate a bunch of lavender plants, and we're going to create this long strip of pollinator, sort of deer-proof pollinator type garden with an art installation. So we're trying to adapt for them, but it's been a bit of build it and then they will come, I think.
Awesome.
I think on that note too, having like an abundance of pathways into the project and having connections at the school, like building rapport with parents, finding volunteers that are intimately involved in the school that want to help create that bridge. I know I was at an advantage in that way, in that my children went to the school next to where the food forest is now. So I had connections with teachers, and that buy-in and interest, because I was like feeding them how awesome this was. So having multiple ways in, I think, is helpful.
That makes sense. I've got a comment in the chat here from Brittany from Donkin, educator here. I work at Donkin School, where we have a large community-led garden on our school grounds. I think the biggest thing is just being there for professional development opportunities and getting the principal on board to make it a school goal as part of our school success plan. All schools have to do this, and also being involved in the school advisory committees, or the SACs. That's a good tip. SACs also have funding that they get to distribute to projects that they believe in. So there can be some monetary support that comes from the SAC councils. And then I have, okay, so maybe one more question, and then Bria is going to do a reveal of the note taking, and then we'll say goodbye. So from Emma, you mentioned contracting out in your presentation, Teresa. Are there any resources or tips on how to compensate, i.e. fund a coordinator to help maintain food forests and school garden as a way to retain stewardship if volunteerism is somewhat tapped out?
Yeah, we found that, well, for our project, we just, I sort of became the de facto project coordinator because my co-founders said I'm not doing that. So I ended up sort of carrying the project, and just really found there had to be a point person to steer it all. People were really excited to participate at the work parties or take on tasks, but to actually really coordinate all the pieces, it sort of did take a central person or small group. So that became me at first, and then it was really a matter of, so I did not have any specific funding, but was able to just raise sufficient funds and put it into our plan. We created a nonprofit organization so that we could have a board, and I could remove myself from, a conflict of interest, because there was a desire to have me carry on for a bit more as the project coordinator, just because I have my hands too deep into it. No one else does. But my goal is to not have it become dependent on me. So yeah, it was a matter of just, raising funds from a variety of sources, and having that in our budget, and having, a board that wanted to see that happen. And then we were able to contract a bit, starting to contract myself a little bit this year, but also last year we were able to contract a forest operations coordinator. So I sort of split up the work that I was doing, and created a contract for another individual to really do the more hands-on plant and forest care.
Okay, and that contract, was that, how many hours a week? Like, was it like an 8-month contract or year round? Was it part-time, the forest
Yeah.
part?
Yeah. So it's sort of last year and this year have done it slightly differently, but it just was estimating the amount of work to be done, and coming up with sort of sort of an hourly rate and a cap on how many hours for the year. So last year it was just a part-time thing. It was capped at $9,000 for the forest operations coordinator. And this year we have project coordinator and forest operations capped at $6,000 each. So there's small contracts, but it has been really helpful to let us get the work done. It's not necessarily something. It's probably more complex than you could hope to have, say, a student take on or do something like that, because it's required somebody who really knows a lot about what's going on and keep the ball rolling. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that insight. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your insight. I hope everyone is feeling curious to check out our Apple Tree Guild. If these projects seem a little overwhelming because of how fabulous they are, the Apple Tree Guild is a really nice place to just check in and kind of refresh on what you've heard today about the basics of one fruit tree guild, which can start with an apple tree, a few shrubs, and some herbs, and go through the layers at a community space, or possibly on school grounds, as long as you get permission from the maintenance supervisor, and go through the right channels. So Bria, are you ready to come on and kind of show your graphic illustration? This will be our last step. I'm also going to put the chat, or you could just share your screen, I guess, if you want to come on, but I'm going to put our funding. We have it's called an infrastructure garden grant program right now, and so it's open for schools in Nova Scotia to apply. Yes, it's late in the season to have a grant available, but you can implement it over the course of this growing season through the summer, or even in the fall when you come back, if you don't plan on being on school grounds this fall or summer.
Sorry, yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Do I need to do anything, or you're good?
I think I'm good, yeah. Okay, should be sharing now. This is what I have. Ooh, I'll get more contrast. Can you see?
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
And I will be adding like your names and everything for the specific content that everybody spoke about. I just ran out of time. But the final version will have the specific people who are presenting and their names, and yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for capturing that information. So I'm going to be sending around a follow-up link probably early next week with a link to the YouTube recording. So folks who signed up, there were about 50 people who signed up, will be able to watch it at a later date. And also you'll be able to see these notes, and all the links that we shared today will be included in that email if you want to connect more with Grow, Eat, Learn resources. My name is Jess Ross. My email is on the Nourish website, so feel free to reach out and see how Nourish and the Grow Eat Learn program might support your project. We really appreciate you making the time to come today and to learn a little bit about food forests and youth programming and the mighty ruby-throated hummingbird and its lovely cardinal flower partnership. So thanks again, and we will have another webinar series next year, probably in the winter when it's a good time for dreaming and scheming about the coming growing season. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.